Like your watch.
Yours are hot top.
So I went to Europe in 60. At the end of 61, I left here in New Zealand and arrived in Europe early 62. And when I first met Chris, it was during the New Zealand Tasman Series races when he was driving the 250F Maserati. I didn't really get to know him then. I got to know him as a good friend and mate when he first arrived in Europe. And Chris was still straight off the farm from bulls, and it was his first OE experience. And it was a fairly steep learning curve. But we were all fairly green. It was my second year in Europe, so I was a lot wiser than he was. But they were wonderful days, absolutely wonderful days. And we were all young Kiwis with our eyes wide open, just taking it all in. It was a wonderful experience. We were all scratching around for somewhere to live. There were several of us, and Ian Young went out and found this giant old English house. I believe it belonged to a diplomat who was overseas. And Ian Young managed to negotiate a reasonably cheap rent, and so we all chipped in and moved into this place, and it was nicknamed the Castle. And there was Tyler Alexander, Ian Young, myself, Teddy Mayer, and when Chris first arrived, he had no idea. It became a bit of a staging point for everybody that arrived from New Zealand. They would just lob in. There was always a spare bed. It was a huge old place, a wonderfully relaxed atmosphere, and of course there was always a party going on sometimes. Bruce wanted Chris to be part of the team, and I'm not quite sure what level of negotiation reached, but Chris was going to drive Formula 1 for us and the sports cars. And that was the year that we had the V8 Ford engine that never achieved anything, and so there was never a car for Chris, Bruce was really upset by it because he rated Chris very highly as a driver. But during that period, Chris did probably 90% of the tyre testing work for McLaren Racing. We had a contract to supply a car and driver to the tyre manufacturer, and Chris was the one that did most of the driving in those tests, which gave him a huge amount of seat time and a huge amount of experience with the tyres that weren't even on the market. So it was really good for Chris, and it was great for Bruce McLaren Racing. He had a great natural talent, but he was not terribly well disciplined, but that taught him discipline. And there was one occasion where the tyre manufacturer, the guys at the testing track decided that Chris was spitting out all of these numbers. Every time he came in, he was very accurate in the description of what he felt about the tyres. And these guys couldn't really believe that somebody could be that consistent and that accurate. And so they decided to trick him one day, and they ran a set of tyres and came in and put another set on, and then the second time he came in, they put the first set back on again, just to see. And it was a bit naughty because it could have burnt back on them, but Chris said to them, came straight back in, and he said, well, I don't know, but he said, I would swear that was the same set of tyres they had on the test before the last, and they were really quite blown away. It could have turned out bad, but Chris could have came in and given them a whole different analysis to the tyres, but he was spot on. We had a race in Canada that I went to with Chris, and he cleaned up the field. He was a very good driver of powerful cars, a bit like Denny Holm. He liked something that you could put your foot into and get the back to hang out, and basically powerful cars, which is what all those early Can-Am cars were, or all of the Can-Am cars were. Life, and especially the life of a racing driver, depends a lot upon being there at the right time and the circumstances and timing. And all of those things came together for Chris's Ferrari drive. It was just terribly sad for Chris that the Ferrari empire was not going through a really successful period at that time, because just after Chris left, the team started to fire and they started to win races. So it's just...
The frustration level was beyond
blood vessel bursting, you know. It really was. I mean, I remember the one that Claremont Ferrand in the Matra, and the bloody puncher. And he said to me that he caught up I don't know how many places. In another 2 laps he would have gone back into the lead. And but he said to me, you don't need to drive like that because that's how you kill yourself. Again in Madrid, Irama, he was so far out in the lead in the Ferrari. I mean, not 2 car lengths, I mean, a third of a lap. And the thing goes and stops. And there was a bloody fuse, the ceramic that held the fused copper strip in the petrol pump circuit. I left Bruce in 67 because we'd done all that tyre testing for Firestone. Then Goodyear made an offer to Bruce that was greater than Firestone for financial support. So Firestone said to me, if we can keep you, we've lost Bruce, but we haven't lost everything, because you know the interface of suspension and tyres, you know. That's how I came to work at Firestone. So then Chris went to Ferrari. Then I'm heading up the race tyre development for Formula 1 for Firestone, and Ferrari were running on Firestone. So I'm back testing tyres again with Chris, with him working for Ferrari this time and me working for Firestone. So Chris and I had an empathy, if you like to call it. No, we sort of felt about these things because we'd been working together on these things for so long. And I could communicate very well with Dr. Engineer Mauro Figueri, who in my mind was a genius, you know. And it was always a happy big operation. It was fun. Okay, it was serious fun, but it was fun. Colin Chapman believed his car required special treatment, and Enzo Ferrari his, but you know, you have to be a bit of a politician and make them both feel good, and well, we did the best we could. I remember we had been tyre testing at Monza, you know, and they had to stop at lunchtime. You can't work through lunch in Italy, you know. And in the centre of the circuit at Monza was a restaurant, a pretty good restaurant, and we'd all stop, and the old man would come up here to have Dr. Franco Gozzi, who was his personal secretary, drive him up to Monza. He wouldn't go to races, but he'd come to test programs. So he'd be there, then it would be lunchtime, you see, so we'd go to lunch, and he would, you know, generally, because he would want to know what's going on from me, I'd sit one side and then Figueri would sit the other side. And I remember the first time I was a bit awe-inspired, you see. And he said to me in English, Mr. Harre, what would you like to drink? Because I had heard that he never spoke a word of English, you see. And I thought, the only foreign beer I knew at that time was Amstel from Holland, you see. So it's not like an Amstel beer. You know, he ordered 2 Amstels, one for himself and one for me.
How would you describe his driving style?
Well, it was completely natural. There was nothing forced in it. It just happened, you know. The only other person who did that I ever saw was Jimmy Clark. And probably one of the greatest races I've ever watched was Clark versus Amon at Sandown Park in 1968. I mean, the Graham Hills and the Jack Bravins and them were in another race back behind somewhere. And Chris in the Tasman Dino Ferrari and Clark in the Lotus 49 with the 2.5 litre. The corner by the pits, they were coming through. One lap, Chris's front wheel would be inside Clark's front and rear wheel. The next lap, it would be the other way. I don't believe that there's anybody else I know in that era that could have actually run wheel to wheel with Jimmy Clark, because most times he was gone, not because of his superior equipment, which did help a lot in his results, but because of his superior ability. No, I was lucky to be in an arena where I worked with the both of them. I worked with the Graham Hills and the Jochen Rints and the Jackie X's and all those. I mean, I guess for somebody from Hunterville, that was quite a privilege.
Yeah, he led a lot of Grand Prix and the cars let him down, which is terrible because he could have been the dominant driver. And if you look at a few so near misses, Chris could have been the world champion, as Denny was. And to me, Chris was the one guy I thought could go head-to-head with Jim Clark and beat him. He had so much talent, so much natural talent, so quick and that wonderful balance, car control.